Welcome to part 2 of the pruning video series. Let's get started. I want to talk to you about the water pressure theory when pruning. Now, of course, the water is actually the sap that provides energy for the trees, but we'll refer to it for now as water. Just for a minute, let's pretend that your tree is made up of hollow pipes that are filled with high pressure water. Now in the springtime, the water, or the energy from the roots, starts to be pumped up from the ground into the trunk and wants to go skyward. Each piece of fruit will receive that water from the pipe it is attached to. Typically, the larger the pipe, the more water it will receive. Now when a pruning cut is made, the water flow will now actually be interrupted or stopped from the spot you made the cut, but the same pressure is still coming from the root system, so it must be displaced somewhere else. Now the million-dollar question is, where else is it going to go? Here's a simple way to think about this. If you're cutting a large branch compared to the main trunk or leader of the tree, you're probably diverting a lot of energy into the rest of the tree. And if you're cutting a small branch, not much energy or water will be diverted into the rest of the tree. Now with experience, you will start to intuitively have a pretty good idea about where the extra water, which is actually sap or energy, will go. Before I even make the first pruning cut on a tree, I will also do a quick assessment of the growth from last year, which indicates how much energy or how much vigor the tree has. Now to do this assessment, simply look at the new shoot growth from last year. The first question to ask is, how long was the shoot growth from last year? Remember to follow the branch tips back from the end of the branches until you see the notch or ring, which shows you where the branch grew the previous year. Now, generally speaking, if the growth was from about 3 to 7 inches or 8 to 18 centimeters on most branches, the trees would be considered to have medium vigor. If the growth was from 7 to 24 inches or 18 to 60 centimeters on most branches, the trees would be considered to have high vigor. Simply put, the higher the vigor or energy of the tree, the greater the response will be from each of your pruning cuts. Now it's time to take a step back and decide what we actually want to accomplish with our trees in question. I'm thinking about all the things that we talked about earlier, like reducing the crop load, keeping the tree in its space, also thinking about the 50% rule, allowing sunlight in, stimulating new growth, and removing dead or dying wood. So let's talk about one of the most important but simple rules to follow when pruning, which I just mentioned earlier. It's called the 50% rule. If any of the side branches get to be 50% or larger than the main trunk or leader of the tree, it's almost always time to cut it out. This is because the other large limbs will start to take over from the main leader and try to become the main leader. In these plantings, one leader is all that is allowed due to the space allocated for growth. So my goal is to make the tree as uniform as possible while remembering that the tree is never going to be perfect. Be ready to make some compromises. Otherwise, you probably won't have any branches left on the tree. Also, be aware that you do have to still be aggressive and take those big branches out now instead of leaving them, as next year they will be even bigger. Taking a step back and observing the overall shoot growth and structure of the trees is vital. But there's another extremely important part of pruning, and that is knowing the history of an apple block. If you know the history of how big the fruit was and the quality of the fruit, that can be half the battle, as you can adjust your pruning to be more or less aggressive from that knowledge. If it's the first year that you will be pruning an apple block, try to contact the previous orchard manager to find out what the crop history has been. If the fruit has been small, prune hard to reduce the crop and increase the vigor. If the fruit has been too large, make less cuts. Almost always, make the bigger cuts first. It is much easier to get the big, ugly wood out of the way, then you can focus on the smaller detail cuts. Now there's nothing worse than making a bunch of detailed cuts on a branch only to realize that you probably should have taken out the whole branch in the first place. Now one other tip when you're sizing up high-density apple trees for pruning is to look at the bud union where the apple variety has been grafted to the dwarfing rootstock. If the ball or the bud union of the tree is very close to the ground, you will generally be dealing with a tree that is very vigorous. If the bud union or ball is quite far out of the ground, excessive vigor will usually be much less of a problem. Now there are many different types of dwarfing rootstocks. which have a huge impact on the overall tree vigor, as well as the soil types too. So do your homework on the apple block so you know what you're dealing with. In the next video, we will be getting into the meat and potatoes of pruning. I'll be showing you many different difficult scenarios that commercial pruners come across every day, and how to deal with those difficult scenarios with confidence. Let's get pruning. Check it out.